Morning, everybody. I think what you're seeing is the pros and cons of being programmed against Fauci. So I'm thrilled that all of you are here in the room with us. We have, the four of us have been talking about this subject probably for most of our lives. But recently we've been digging into it a little bit more in preparation for this panel. It's a really, really broad conversational subject, and we are going to try to be very concise because we have a very short period of time. So hopefully we'll condense some of the things for you and allow you to think about it a little bit more in ways that perhaps you haven't been thinking about it before. As you know, much of the culture in New Orleans takes place on the street, and very much of it is by Black artists. A lot of the documentation of that culture comes from people outside of that culture, sometimes outside of the race. So this creates some conflict in sometimes, some confusion in sometimes, and it creates change in sometimes. And this, it's just a really deep conversational subject that we're really interested in. I'm glad to see that you're interested too. So you all have probably read the bios of the people here. I'm going to just give you a thumbnail of our panelists. Eric has been documenting the broad range of Black social life and traditions, mostly in the streets of New Orleans. Local New Orleanian, he's been shooting for more than 40 years of time.
Started at 2.
Cheryl Gerber is a freelance journalist and documentarian, has done journalism, but also has really pretty much moved into photography as her documenting format. And Cherice is an artist. She is an educator, an arts administrator. She's the co-editor of 11 publications. She's coordinated exhibits. She's been in exhibits. She's done all kinds of things. And mostly her work is autobiographical. I'm the dilettante on this group here. I'm the only one not from New Orleans originally. And I am not a writer. I'm not an artist. So I'm here to moderate and try to bring you some information from these great panelists. So we thought that an interesting thing for us to do, instead of reviewing our bios and everything, would be to kick off kind of what each person's philosophy is around this idea of documenting culture, especially if you're from outside of the culture. And we're going to start with Eric.
Let's start with controversy. There's a thing called white gaze, G-A-Z-E, coined by Toni Morrison. What it succinctly means is that everything is a white gaze, meaning it defaults to how white people see things and how things should be. I've had experiences with white photographers on the street in terms of the white gaze, and this particular story is going to be short. I think a lot of people have read the book by Ralph Ellison, The Invisible Man. So it was Mardi Gras morning. Donald Harrison Jr., Cherice's brother, was coming out of St. Augustine's church, and he had this big lion pelt. And Father Ledoux was throwing holy water on him. So I knew what was going to happen, so I positioned myself right at the exit to the doorway. And I'm like 6'2", 215, right? So this white photographer comes and stands right in front of me. And I lost it. There are children in the room. I told him I would kill him. And I was prepared to do so. I hurt him real badly. And he walked away. Now, a lot of you may think, oh, it's an angry black man. Since birth, I've been an angry black man. So these things happen, and what I am disturbed about, not so much that white photographers shoot my culture, but they do it with disrespect. They don't respect the people in the culture. And that's very disturbing to me, that they just feel, again, white gaze, that they feel entitled to do so. And not saying you shouldn't shoot, but have respect for the subject that you shoot, right? And that's always been my philosophy. People that know me in the street know I would defer to somebody with a camera phone. If they're there first, I've had people defer to me because they see my camera and they say, "Oh, Mr. Fattar, you come on, you got the camera." I say, "No, you were here first. I can get my shot. I'm a photographer. I'm supposed to be able to get my shot. So no, I'm not going to replace you. You stay right there because your picture is important to you." So my whole thing about the shooting in the street and being respectful, and there's two things on top of my head. I was shooting in Trinidad, and they have masking Indians there too. So I went to take pictures of this masking Indian, and he was like, "No, no, no." And I slapped myself upside the head and said, "Eric, you're in another country, another culture. What makes you think, because you have Indians in New Orleans, that you can take this picture?" So I asked the guy that was walking with him, I said, "Would you like a beer? Would the chief like a beer?" I bought the whole tribe of beer then. Drops it again, I'm sorry. The other thing that happened, I was shooting, I forget what country in Africa I was in. They had an African woman breastfeeding her child in the marketplace. And I refused to take the photo. Because this was a personal moment, although it was a public space. It would have been a great photo, but I refused to take it. So I know it's going to come back to me at some point and let other people speak, but it's all about respect, respecting the culture, but respecting the people in the culture. One thing that Echo left out, this lady here is a culture bearer also. All the other things that she's known for and has accomplished, she's a culture bearer. She knows what to do with the power of the needle and the thread.
Thank you, Eric. And Cherice, we're going to go to you next. Do you want to?
I am a guardian, guardian, guardian of the culture, the whole wide culture. I don't bow down. I don't know how. Oh, how I love being charged with guarding the culture. So I can't sing anyway, but I have a foggy voice this morning from my sinus drip back there from the allergies. But I am a guardian of the culture. I am a guardian of the flame. Our group is named Guardians of the Flame. My father charged us, literally, and I am like Cat Williams. I have receipts. I have the video with him saying that we guard the culture, our history, our heritage, the fact that our ancestors brought something here that predates our enslavement in the Americas, that we are charged with guarding this. And what we do is the empirical evidence that it could not be beaten or bred out of us. We found ways to remember in our deep places, in the very marrow of our bones, and that we are responsible for guarding it and being a vessel for it, and then passing it on to children. That is why we have so many children around us, and Eric can attest to that. We have it's just mostly children. It's like the grown folk with the Young Guardians of the Flame. We actually have a group, Young Guardians of the Flame, and Congo Kids. And I always encourage people to really dissect and then put it back together. What they're doing and what we're doing. I know what I'm doing as a guardian of the flame. I'm clear on that. But when you go big game hunting in African American communities and you take your best shot and you shoot people and you have them as trophies and you hang those pictures on the wall and you sell them, realize you're engaging in a contemporary colonial paradigm of selling brown bodies. Realize that your, I don't know what you call it, Eric, your logs for your photographs, Cheryl, that they're like manifest. But you don't name the people often. It's better now. And you don't, for me, it's very important that I'm a guardian of the flame. And one person, a photographer who we all know, took a picture of me and called me a sapphire queen. Well, sapphire is a stereotype and it's an insult. I don't know if she was that ignorant to it, but just to have a color and queen. My name is Cherice Harrison Nelson. I am the Maroon Queen of the Guardians of the Flame. As a graduate student, or as any student, I can't use a photographer's picture without crediting them. But you can use my picture and you can sell me without crediting my creative expressions. And I just want people to think about how would you want to be treated, especially with children. We were very guarded with our children. I took my children out for the first time St. Joseph's Night, and they had a very curated experience because I realized they never met Indians. So that was an opportunity for them to meet Indians. It was very curated. But would you want your child's picture taken without your permission and sold? People sell pictures for $3,500, no joke. Would you want your picture taken? I am a queen. If I am at my car and my mother is helping me get dressed, I'm in a state of undress. Would you take Queen Elizabeth or Queen Camille, whatever her name is, picture in a state of undress? If you wouldn't do that, what makes it okay for you to do that to me? Is it because of my brown skin? Is it because of my size? Is it because I come from a community cultural tradition? Because it's not street, even though we use that. It's a community that holds us together. And we have to really acknowledge African American ways of life, the ways that we remember, and community. Mr. Ike was 94 when he became an ancestor, and he would always say, they don't talk about black on black love. They talk about black on black this, crime, but these cultural expressions are the epitome of black on black love, the way we love up on each other and the way we share our love for ourselves with the community.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cherice. And Cheryl Gerber.
Yes. Full disclosure, I am a white photographer who occasionally photographs black culture. I guess I photographed my first second line in 1990 or 91, around that time. And I was born in New Orleans, but my family was part of the white flight to the North Shore. So I was very ignorant about black culture. And when I moved to New Orleans right after college, I was working as a reporter, a journalist, started taking photographs to go with my stories. And when I discovered this black culture that was going on in the city where I was born, that my family had taken me away from, protected me from, that sort of thing, I became very curious about it. I didn't continue photographing black culture because it was very contemptuous when I was out there for the first time as a young photographer in my 20s. I heard, the white privilege, the culture vulture. My feelings were hurt so much during that time. But I did a lot of self-reflection and realized I had to educate myself. I wasn't just going to be the white gazer photographing black people. I wanted to understand it, so I did the research. I read the books. I found out what all of these cultures meant. And one of the reasons that we named this particular panel, Just Because You Can Doesn't Mean You Should, was thanks to Cherice and culture bearers like her who have pointed things out to me that I might have been doing wrong. And one day she called me because she was concerned that a white photographer, not from New Orleans, was photographing her during one of her protests during the George Floyd murder. And he was going to every corner and not introducing himself, and it was kind of freaking her out a little bit. So she called me and I said, well, unfortunately, it's legal. He can do it. If you're out in public, he can photograph anything he wants. And that's when she said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think about that. My approach to photography is a little different than theirs because I'm not covering it as a black person. I'm covering it as a journalist. I tell the story. I am so fortunate to have my foot in the wealthiest venues of the city, all the way down to like the murder and crime scenes. So I have this duality going on in my head all of the time about the inequalities, the dichotomies, the contrasts that make life so painful and yet so joyful here. So I try to tell the story of all New Orleans. And I have to tell myself, if I'm going to go photograph a black event, I'm going to get some pushback. But I'd be remiss if I didn't include black culture in the story of New Orleans, especially since Katrina, when, I've done 3 books since Katrina, and they all reflect how after Katrina, I thought everything was going to be gone. And the urgency to photograph culture from, whether it's black or white in New Orleans was very important to me. So that's how I deal with it. And as far as the respect thing, yes, I don't jump in front of black photographers, even if it's with a cell phone. And you have to get in the front if you want to get the shot without the cell phones. I've just incorporated cell phones into my shots. It's who we are at this time in our lives. And so I just approach it from, with respect. I used to not get the names of the people that I photographed, but in the last 2 books I did. I made every effort. Sometimes you can't if something's happening and going by. And I know one of the things we also talked about was asking permission to take photographs. That is respectful. As a journalist, I don't do that because you're changing the narrative if you do that. But if somebody puts their hand up or shows me body language, I can read pretty quickly that they don't want to be photographed and I back off. So that's how I go about it.
Well, I think you all can see how intense this conversation can be, and it's fun to explore it here with you all. One of the questions we talked about is, when does a person who's documenting step across the line of appropriate and inappropriate behavior, and where is that line? Like, how do you know where it is?
Let me ask the audience a question. What is white culture? Anybody has any idea what white culture is? Okay.
Sure. White culture is the culture that's taken for granted as being the culture.
Okay, good answer. But what makes white culture, want to be shot and sold like our culture? Do you see white photographers taking picture of white culture and selling it and making monies from it? Anybody?
I'm about to. I photographed St. Anne for 50 years. I'll come out with a book. I mean, that's almost completely white, whether they like it or not.
Does that fall?
Aspects of the culture. I mean, it's not the general term, white culture.
So it's not culture. I mean, it's an aspect of culture that's something that's done during a religious holiday, right?
That's Mardi Gras. It's a Mardi Gras.
No, what we're saying is I'm not familiar with it because I don't shoot it, okay? But, sure.
Okay, I think white culture is often either upper class, but not always, events of people's lives in a positive light or in a tragic light. If someone has been injured or harmed or killed, so showing that good things happen or are part of the culture, whether it's white culture, or bad things happen to people and the tragedy of their existence.
What would be the interest in shooting that?
Or to keep it going, to promulgate the dominance.
No, I'm saying what white photographers shoot, what you define as white culture. And I mean,
Okay.
Rex would not invite me to take pictures of him getting dressed, right? I mean, that's just not gonna happen, right? Or Comas or Momas or all these other people. But white photographers feel empowered to do that with us, right? That's what I'm talking about. Our culture is photographed all over the world, meaning African-centric cultures in other countries because of the diaspora and what have you. We are interesting to all photographers. So what's interesting about taking photos of white people? To that degree. I finally made myself clear, okay. And then he's shaking his head over there and he said he will shoot without their permission. I'm sorry, what did you say? You said you shoot St. Anne's and
It's predominantly white.
and you said something else.
Well, it's very true. You know, we had a group show one time, quite a few years ago, and it was based on culture. And I remember one of my white friends came up to me and said, you know, and there must have been over 100 photographs and artworks. And
Thank you, dear.
he came up to me, he goes, you know, I grew up in New Orleans, and if I came to this show, I wouldn't know that white people lived here. And I looked around, and yeah, about 90% of the photographers were white, and 100% of the photography on the walls was black. So, you know, I've struggled with this my entire career, still struggle with it. It's a learning experience. You have to really learn by doing it, but also asking questions. Cherice has been very generous with me, sometimes at times where I felt really bad in public, but you know, you go home and you self-reflect and say, I'm going to do it differently next time.
So maybe, Cherice, you can address that question about where is the line and how do you know when you've crossed the line as a documenter?
Well, as I said earlier, you shouldn't do to others what you don't want done to those you share DNA with and you love. And to me, that really, really embodies the way that people should do their work. I work with children and I treat children the way I would want if I had some grandchildren to be treated, the way I wanted my son to be treated, the way I want my son to be treated, the way I want my mom to be treated. I wouldn't do to anyone what I don't want. If you don't want your child photographed and sold for $3,500 or $2,500 without your permission, without your consent, if you feel that would be a violation of your child's privacy rights, what would make you think another child, just because they have on an Indian suit, is not a child? As an artist, we do a lot of group creation, and I would say everything we do as a group, we start with a civil rights model from John O'Neill, Story Circle. And when we sit at the table in a circle, because we're remembering who we are and how important the circle is to us, that circle that's unbroken when you don't know who's giving and who's receiving, the circle that keeps us together without a beginning and without an end. And we strip away all the feathers, all the beads, all the stones, all the songs. And we begin to build the play with the human experience, the things that we all can relate to as human. Because much of what we talk about in the struggle as people of African descent is the struggle for our humanity. I personally do not like the term fighting for civil rights, because they're not fighting for civil rights. We're not. We're fighting for human rights. And we have to begin to create a world where we're not just surviving, people of African descent. We're not surviving, but we're thriving. We're thriving. I'm a cancer survivor, people would say, but I think I'm a thriver. And we have to want that for our children. We have to want that for ourselves. And we have to want that for others. When you go downtown, I never even knew they built a hotel in front of the casino. It's like a whole hotel there. Like really a hotel, but they figured out how to build it in the existing space. But do you realize how much money it takes? When we begin to think about money, like the most I'm gonna think about is how much it would cost to put a room on the back of my studio. And I'm thinking, I don't want to put a room on the back. But there are people that are in rooms thinking about how to put up a hotel. Do you realize the disparity in wealth? And even when I'm thinking that, I'm just surviving. And we have to figure out ways that when something is commodified, black bodies, brown bodies, that there's some equity in that and not just diversity because it's somebody else taking my picture, but that we really, really, really examine our motivations and whether we would want that done to someone we love.
Thank you. Cheryl, you wanna step in on that?
I mean,
at
we
all?
were talking about crossing the line. If you've been to a second line, you know that they have ropes to keep the club people in the middle. You have to be invited into the ropes. I've seen people jump in those ropes, and you're disturbing the whole dynamic of everything. The other thing is like, getting in front of a African-American person who may just be a person with a little cell phone. If, ask permission. Crossing lines, I agree with them about a lot. The only thing I don't agree with is, for me, is just the asking the permission to everybody you photograph, because it changes the story. And she was talking about the dichotomy of the rich and the poor, and that's how I ended up doing this first book, New Orleans, Life and Death in the Big Easy. And one of the, what I do is I just basically go out and photograph everything that I'm attracted to, everything that I'm repulsed by, and store it in my computer, and one day maybe I'll do something with it. And this book came about because I was, particularly after Katrina, I was photographing so much of the devastation, and I was seeing the neighborhoods that were being rebuilt and the neighborhoods that were not being rebuilt. And one example, I had a photograph of 3 kids at the Jewish Community Center jumping into a bright blue pool, and then like 3 blocks into the 7th Ward, 2 African-American kids were jumping off of their porch onto discarded mattresses and, blight all around them. And that's what I've always tried to do with my work, is to show those disparities. And in all 3 of my books, I think that I've done that. And I couldn't do it if I didn't photograph some Black culture.
With due respect to Cheryl, AP, National Geographic, New York Times, or any other outlet has ever asked me to shoot photos of my city. I had an exhibit, and this white woman walked in, and she was looking at my pictures on the wall, and we started talking. She was with National Geographic. And she looked at me and she said, "Why they send me down here? Why didn't they ask you?" Right? And I went into a diatribe about American stuff, so she didn't come to the exhibit. She had more information than she wanted, right? But it brings up the point where I don't think any white photographer can take pictures of my culture better than Black photographers. But a friend of mine named Gerard Mouton made this profound statement: you can never tell by a picture whether the photographer is white or Black. That's very true. But I have certain access. I've been honored and humbled by having the access that I do. And the kind of access I have, I don't know if any other white photographer, I don't care if he's from National Geographic or whatever, has the same kind of access. Because I understand the culture, meaning that as an outsider, because unless you're in the culture, you're an outsider. I've been here all my life. I'm Black, I'm a photographer. But these people spend 3,200 to 5,000 hours every year. They are true artists. They are as much artists as any artist in the entire world, but they're not recognized as such, right? And have that kind of labor, that kind of discipline, that kind of commitment is unbelievable to me in a capitalistic society. So I am humbled and honored that they allow me into their circle so that I can take photos. But there's not many, any white photographer I know that has that kind of access, especially in terms of Cherice and her tribe. I've had access to them for years, and the entire family. I'm like a distant cousin.
I just want to add one quick thing, because you said about not getting the gigs. And you may or may not have taken this gig, but this was right after Katrina. I was photographing for every newspaper in the country that wanted something. And I think it might have been Vogue magazine was doing a story on Mama D, Diane Cole.
Yes.
And they hired me to do the photographs. And I was so excited because I'm a fan of hers to begin with. And the next day, the editor called me and said, she doesn't want you to do it. she wants Eric Waters to do it.
I remember.
And I was
remember
like,
that, yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
You know, you win some, you lose some. But
You
yeah,
were
it's-
definitely blessed on that one.
I know.
If you don't know, I know. I've been on both sides of Mama D, baby. She loved me and
I've
she'd have
spent
told
a
me
lot
off.
of time with her, you know.
I've been on both sides of that.
And that was
coin.
very humbling because she insisted. She held up the publication until I had an opportunity to photograph her.
That's awesome. Well, that sort of like leads into the next question. When does the documentation change or impact what's happening in the culture, and how does that play out for your, Cheryl, you're nodding. Why
Well,
don't you
I
take
mean, that was
first?
one of the things, my mentor, who I know Eric has a problem with, was Michael P. Smith, who was a white photographer who photographed black culture extensively. I actually had seen his photographs at a gallery for fine photography, and I assumed he was black, because I didn't know anybody could take such intimate photographs of African American culture. So I called him at least 5 times before he finally agreed to talk to me. And he said, you have to learn about the culture before you photograph it, first of all. So that took me years. And I forgot my point, but...
About changing the culture.
Oh, one of the criticisms that I often heard by other photographers about Mike Smith, who I adored, people can say whatever they want about him, he taught me a lot, was that he was changing the narrative because he was at every second line, every black cultural event. And when people saw him, they started performing. So it changed what was happening because he was just the guy that was there all the time. So there is that aspect of it. So sometimes if you're a first-time shooter, you might bring a different perspective.
Well, he was lucky that I never encountered him. Because I tell you what I would have done, right? But the white photographers that have access are those that shoot like Cheryl with AP and local periodicals, and they have access because of who they work for, right? And the people they're shooting, they are getting exposure, right? I mean, that white photographer that shot Danny Barker in his house, I never did. I shot Danny Barker, in other terms, but I would love to have been or had access to Danny Barker like they have. So in shooting for national and local periodicals, they do have access, and I guess the payment to the person that's being photographed is I'm being publicized, right? That kind of I'm being given a sense of presence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Cherice, you have anything you want to?
What's the question again?
The question is, if outsiders are coming in to document the culture, does it change the culture?
Well, I pride myself on being at the apex of art, activism, advocacy, and authenticity. What you see is what you get. And I am very guarded of my children, the children that I work with. So I really restrict access to them. They don't, on Carnival Day, we go in the neighborhood to the elders. We don't go down to any of the normal gathering places. But even within that, I want to really give a shout out to Cheryl, because I don't know if you but you came after COVID when we had something at the museum. And Delium, he was one.
Yeah. Oh.
And she did a photo shoot with him on the fly. I bought him a throne chair because I want him to know you a king, baby. You're going to grow up, I'm going to instill this in you from birth.
Right.
And she did the most beautiful photo shoot with him. If we would have paid for that, we would probably paid hundreds, thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I don't charge. I make my money by doing events and working for the media. People think if you have 3 books, you're rolling in it. I just got my royalty check yesterday, and look, I can invite you for a cup of coffee. It's like, so you don't make money on that. It's a total labor of love. It's showing the respect. And when I photograph Indians, it's not like just the Indian. It's the people around. And sometimes I do photograph all of the white people in their St. Patrick's Day green, shirts, because it's always on the same weekend, Super Sunday. And I'll photograph that, showing that aspect of it. I remember one time this old lady, I was photographing her in the context of, she was like so little next to this big regal Indian, and she's like, "What are you photographing? The Indians are over there." She didn't want to be photographed, so I just back off,
And I just want to, I'm being my 88-year-old mother. I don't know what your question was, but I want to say this. So I'm going to say it. And it is that about the intimacy. Eric was invited to photograph my father's funeral because my mother did not want a gazillion photographers in the space. And when you give someone access to your father's funeral, to me that is the highest honor of, we know you're going to do right by us. And my second point, that's not a question that I want to make, is how we flip paradigms. I would love to see accomplished photographers, white, mentor young African American photographers and allow them access to what we call white culture and how to commodify that. They've figured out how to commodify the sale of brown bodies. Help these brown bodies figure out how to commodify and sell white bodies and get the commodity of doing that, because even if you don't make money from your photographs, you get some ancillary benefits that you're the to-go person for something where you can make money. So let's flip that paradigm. Let's get us a group of African American males, I want to say males first, but females, but males first, that can go and photograph intimate white culture and put it in books, hang them on walls, sell them, commodify them, and thrive, and not simply survive.
Right,
Think about it, ponder.
You first have to define what white culture is, but anyway.
But we won't get into that. It's a pondering, it's a ponder.
So can I do a promotion? This is a book that I'm very proud of being a co-author. I have another book previous to this one called Freedom's Dance, which is the history of associated and pleasure clubs, and I'm very proud of that book, not because of my images, all the images in that book are mine, but because of the writers that wrote for the book, and they did some serious research. But this here, I can brag on this, and people know me, I don't brag on myself, but I can brag on this book because it's totally unique. It's never been done before, never will it be done again. And what makes it unique is because and Larry Everidge is back there, he's one of the photographers in this book. And because people don't know that photography was brought to New Orleans in 1840. There was only one other place photography was brought to in 1840, it was New York, right? So New Orleans is known for food, music, architecture, but now it can be known for its photography, especially its black photography. This book entails work of 84 black photographers, all